Hello and welcome to A Frisch Perspective. Today I'm going to continue my topic on anxiety. In the first video on anxiety I talked about the ways that anxiety has come out in my life through panic attacks, through more of a generalized anxiety, and through social anxiety. In this video I want to talk about some of the factors that can predispose us to having high anxiety. And you might find that some of these things that I'm going to talk about are surprising. They might not be things that you would necessarily link with anxiety, and yet I think that they are really factors that can contribute to anxiety problems. And I've just come up with a list here that I typed out. It's nothing super scientific or formal, but it gives some picture of what I think are some issues we need to think about in our lives. I hope it's helpful. The first one, the first factor that I'd like to look at is how we interact with other people. And I really believe I've come to the conclusion that one thing that can cause us to feel pressured is actually that we're being too critical of others. And it reminds me of something that I read about that Jesus said, that the judgment that we are judging others with is the judgment that's going to come back on us. So something that we need to take a look at is, are we being hypercritical and judgmental of others? And that's always something that we need to be careful of. But I do believe that if we have high anxiety, one of the places to look, and it's not always the case, but something we need to look at is, how are we treating other people? And are we putting so much burden on other people that eventually we're starting to feel the weight of that burden that we've placed on others? And sometimes it's guilt that is coming out in our lives, and we really just feel like we're crushed under the weight of the way that we have treated other people. Another thing is how we treat ourselves and how we look at ourselves. Just as we can be overly critical of others, we can also become overly critical of ourselves. And that's something we also need to take a look at. We can really, as humans, place a lot of burdens on ourselves that other people haven't actually placed on us, or we can think very critically of ourselves in ways that other people aren't even thinking about. And so that's another thing that can really put a lot of pressure on us, is when we're being way too hard on ourselves. The third one I wrote down is when we're getting too much work but not enough rest. And that's something we really have to look at. Am I overworking myself? Something that is a really important principle in life is that we need a certain amount of work and we need a certain amount of rest. And I really believe that some of anxiety problems get tied in with a physical issue of not getting enough rest. Now, on the other side of that, we can also have the kind of work that can predispose us towards stress. And I think in our culture we have a lot of sedentary work where we sit a lot and we're not moving a lot. And I really believe for my own life, because a lot of times I do sit and I read and I work on the computer, that sedentary still lifestyle can cause me to get bottled up with emotion. And so too much sitting, not enough moving is something we want to look at. Another issue that kind of relates to what I just said is built up emotion. When we have a lot of emotion internally that's building up and we don't have a release for it, or we're not identifying it and acknowledging it. So one way that this might come out is that we don't really feel free to feel a certain thing or to express that feeling. It might be that we don't feel free to show our weakness and our vulnerability. And I really do believe that sometimes anxiety results from, to put it crassly, kind of putting on a show for people, making people think that we have it all together, when internally there's actually a lot of turmoil and a lot of struggle that we're dealing with. Another way, though, that this can come out is just feeling guilty about something, that we maybe feel like we shouldn't feel angry and shouldn't feel certain emotions. And so we suppress those emotions. And if we suppress emotions, it gets bottled up. And I really believe one of the ways that we can kind of break down is with anxiety. For some people, they bottle up their emotions, and it really comes out in the form of anxiety. The next one I have here is just background stress. And again, these are factors that, you may not really think about, but you might just have a lot of stress in general in your life and not realize how it's starting to build up and affect you. I remember years ago when I had to go to the hospital one time for a panic attack, that the nurse asked me, "Have you been under a lot of stress lately?" And my initial reaction was, "No, I don't think I've been under a lot of stress." What I didn't realize, though, is there was a lot of background stress. I had had some health problems that year, and I had that week had to do a concert that I was getting ready for, and then the next day I was going to be filling in for our pastor at our church and doing a lot of work there. So the truth is I had a lot of background stress that I probably didn't realize how much it was affecting me. The next one I have written is trauma, which shouldn't surprise us, but these traumatic events in our lives that can cause a lot of stress. The way that I describe stress is kind of like a tank, and you have a certain amount that you can fill up with and be okay, but eventually you hit this level that goes over the red line and the tank begins to overflow, and we have major problems with anxiety. And maybe that's how you felt. Your tank has been overflowing with anxiety. But traumatic events, I think, put that tank at a higher base level, that just to begin with, you're already having a high amount of stress just to begin with because of traumatic events. Where it can get surprising, though, is that yes, there are traumatic events we know have had an impact on our lives, abusive relationships, or a death in the family, or some other huge event that has caused a lot of trauma and maybe even post-traumatic stress. But there are also traumatic things that, again, are more subtle and more background. It may be that we're having relationship problems, or there's drug use that is somehow affecting us, whether it's for ourselves or someone that we know and love, or some other issue that is actually causing a lot of trauma and we're just not fully aware of it. And so we want to think about, is there trauma that I have to acknowledge and cope with and deal with in my life? And sometimes it is very obvious trauma that we've been through, but we've just never taken the time to deal with some of those things. And the next one I have is the final factor that I wanted to share, and that is actually our culture. And I really believe that our culture breeds anxiety. If you look at American culture today, there are many people that struggle with anxiety disorders. I don't think that's a coincidence. I don't think that's an accident. I think that there are reasons why we're predisposed to anxiety in our culture. One of the reasons is just what our culture values, that we're taught to focus on our image and get everybody to look at us in a certain way. And that puts a lot of pressure on ourselves. And we're encouraged really sometimes to put on a show rather than to be real and vulnerable and to let people see what we're really like. Another issue is that we're encouraged sometimes, or it's easy for us to live with unhealthy choices. And even though we're so blessed to have so many wonderful things here in our country, we're also able to make a lot of unhealthy choices as a result. So we don't always take care of our bodies the way that we should. We don't always do things in the right amounts. So eating the right things, eating the right amount, getting the rest that we need, making sure we do things in moderation and not overdoing it. We can struggle with that a lot as Americans. Another issue, though, is just our belief systems in our culture and what our culture tells us about life. And that doesn't help us. What is the world around us, especially where we live, telling us about ourselves and about the purpose for life? Well, a lot of the things that I hear are not very encouraging and very helpful. I think that in our culture there's this sense that all we really have to live for is today and for the here and now. All you can really know is what we have here. But that doesn't help us when we think about our overall perspective on life and what's going to happen to me when I die, and why am I here? Why do I exist? Do I have a purpose? What does it mean to be human? And what does it mean to be in relationship with people around me? The culture around us doesn't always give us clear and helpful answers to those questions, and I think that facilitates and breeds more anxiety. There are a lot of things that I could say about our culture, including the fact that we can be very chemically dependent in ways that are unhealthy. And so I'd like to talk about some of those things in coming videos In the next video, I hope to talk about some of the personality traits that predispose us to having anxiety problems. And so stay tuned for that. Also, if you've been watching this video and something that I've said has struck a chord, or you have a question about something, I would love for you to give me some feedback in the comments and for there to be interaction. So please leave your comments and let me know what you're thinking. Also, you might have an idea for something that I could talk about in the future, whether it be about anxiety or some other topic that you think is very important. So thanks so much for watching this. I hope you've enjoyed and been helped by this episode of A Frisch Perspective.